3. Remember 2 things. 2010. When I was 15, my grandfather told me to remember 2 things in life. Life is short and precious, so live every day like it's your last. The second gem of advice he gave me was, if you're ever faced with gurgle. That last spoken word was more phonetic as he went into one of those grand mal seizures mid-sentence. As his eyes rolled back into his head and he shook like one of those quarter rides outside of a Walmart, my mind grew increasingly confused as to what he was going to say. So confused that when he died moments later, it was still all my mind could fixate itself upon. Now that I'm older, 23 to be exact, the question still comes to mind from time to time. What was he trying to say? My mind has concocted about 1 billion possible scenarios. Some of them are logical, such as, if you're ever faced with the chance to find love, take it. Others are slightly less logical. If you're ever faced with a rabid polar bear with giant dildos for arms, run. Although given the case of either suggestion becoming a reality, I think they are both pretty sound pieces of advice. After all, I read somewhere that in Russia, giant dildo-armed polar bears account for at least 50% of all deaths in the wild tundra. The other 50% is dysentery. When I think of dysentery, all that comes to mind is all those poor souls I lost in all those countless games of Oregon Trail I spent on my computer as a kid. Although the game did teach me one valuable life lesson. If the river is 16 feet deep, don't ford it. Caulk the wagon and float it across. Or at least wait for the ferry. It's a good life lesson. Again, I hate to bother, but are you ready to order? A nice-sounding female asked as she stared at me as though she had been standing there for quite some time. For a moment, I am caught off guard by her beautiful green chartreuse-flecked eyes. This moment quickly passed as I realized the ample amount of cleavage that is also on display in my line of sight as she leaned down against the table with pen and paper in hand. My mind fluttered back and forth like a one-winged butterfly stuck in a jar of Elmer's white school glue as I attempted to focus on just a singular, magnificent aspect of this stranger's beauty. "Are you all right there?" the beautiful green-eyed cleavage woman asked as she noticed my rather erratic and mildly offensive behavior. "I was just thinking about dysentery." I fumbled out like I should be wearing a helmet and all my forks should have corks at the end of them. "That is very unfortunate." "I mean, my grandfather died," I said in an attempt to rectify the situation and provide an excuse for my behavior, despite the fact that my grandfather had been dead for nearly forever ago. "I'm so sorry to hear that," the girl said empathetically as she placed down her pen and pad upon the diner's table and sat across from me. "The name is Emily." "James," I replied as she reached her hand out and placed it in mine to comfort me, or for warmth. I was unsure as her hand was rather cold. It was probably a gesture of comfort, for her other hand just laid against the table like an uncared-for child left out in the cold to die on the Russian tundra. "I am sorry to hear about your grandfather," Emily said as she let out an exhaustive sigh. Or it could have been a sad sigh. I was never very good at sigh reading. "My grandmother just recently passed. I'm still dealing with that loss myself." "How did she pass?" "She was a smoker." "Oh," I said as I nodded my head like I was listening to some catchy rap beat. "Lung cancer." "No," Emily said as a single tear fell from her eye and stained the fake wood-grained table with a tiny wet drop of eye liquid. "She was on oxygen. She blew herself up on accident." "That is so unfortunate." "Thank you," Emily said as she dabbed her eyes with a napkin from a shiny metal tin dispenser. "When my grandfather died," I began as I placed myself back into my 15-year-old shoes. Not literally, as they would have probably not fit or smelled bad. "He said something, or was going to say something. He never got to finish." "Well," Emily said as she tightened her grip upon my hand, "how did it begin?" "If you're ever faced with—" Emily whispered as she gave the statement a moment of thought. "If you're ever faced with the chance to find love, take it?" For a moment my heart felt very warm inside of my chest, like an aluminum foil-wrapped baked potato. Could this be that once-in-a-lifetime encounter that leads to something so much more? Could Emily and I actually... Could this be fate? Her hand is still in mine. It is a bit warmer now. Is this love? A cacophony of sound erupted from the edge of the diner. The sound of glass crashing to the floor in a million pieces filled the air and ripped me away from my beautiful daydream of finally finding love. As my eyes slowly opened, I found myself alone. My hand was empty. "Run!" Emily shouted from across the diner. "What the hell are you doing just sitting there?" I turned my head just in time to come face to face with a giant white polar bear. Its fanged teeth are bared and its giant dildo arms flail about aimlessly, smashing dishes and plates against the floor. As its teeth sink into me, I finally realize what Grandpa attempted to warn me about so long ago.